Hello everyone. In today's lecture we are going to discuss principal elements, that means macro minerals. So in previous lecture we have seen that there are two types of minerals. First type is principal elements or macro minerals, and second type is trace elements or micro minerals. So principal elements are the elements or minerals which are required by our body more than 100 mg per day, while trace elements or micro minerals are the elements which are required by our body in the quantity less than 100 mg per day. So let us see principal elements. The principal elements that are required in the amount greater than 100 mg per day. There are 7 principal elements, macro minerals, that constitute 60 to 80% of the body's inorganic material. That means our body is made up of solid, liquid and gases, and out of this solids are again divided into organic and inorganic elements. So out of this inorganic material, 60 to 80% of our body's inorganic material is made up of 7 principal elements. So which are these 7 principal elements? So let us see that 7 principal elements. So these 7 principal elements are calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, sodium, potassium, chloride and sulfur. So these are the 4 principal elements or macro minerals which are required in our body more than 100 mg per day. And these 7 principal elements or these 7 principal macro minerals constitute 60 to 80% of body's inorganic material. So out of these 7 principal minerals, today we are talking about calcium. So calcium is one of the macro minerals or principal elements. Calcium is the most abundant among the minerals in the body. So we have seen many minerals that are trace elements or principal macro elements. So out of these all minerals, calcium is most abundant among the other minerals in the body. That means calcium is present in the more quantity as compared to other minerals in our body. The total content of calcium in an adult man is about 1 to 1.5 kg. That means in our body, if we calculate total calcium content, then we find that our total calcium content in the body is 1 to 1.5 kg, but this is for adult man or adult woman. But out of these 1 to 1.5 kg, 99% of it is present in the bones and teeth. That means in our body, calcium is present in various places such as bones, teeth, in the cells or cell walls. So out of these 1 to 1.5 kg, 99% of this is present in the bones and teeth. That means calcium is present mainly in our bones and teeth. Now let us see what are the sources of calcium. That means food items from which we get calcium. So let us see sources of calcium. So best sources are milk and milk products. That means calcium is available from the food stuff, that is milk and milk products, and this is the richest source of calcium, while the good sources are beans, leafy vegetables, fish, cabbage, egg yolk. So these are the good sources. That means we get calcium in more quantity from milk and milk products, while from less quantity we get calcium from these food items, that is beans, leaf vegetables, fish, cabbage, and egg yolk. So these are the sources of calcium, or these are the food items from which we get calcium. Then let us see the dietary requirements. That means per day how many quantity or how many amount of calcium is required by our body. So dietary requirements is various as per the age groups. So infants, that means the childrens which are less than 1 year. So infants requires calcium in 300 to 500 mg per day. So this is the requirement of calcium in the infants, that is 300 to 500 mg per day. Then children's, that means age group 1 to 18 years. So these children's required calcium 0.8 to 1.2 gram per day. While in the adult man or woman, calcium requirement is 800 mg per day. While in the woman during pregnancy, also in the lactating women and postmenopausal woman, the requirement is 1.5 gram per day. So in pregnant woman, in lactating woman and postmenopausal woman, calcium requirement is more, because in the pregnancy there is a fetal development occurs, and for the fetal development calcium is more required by this pregnant woman. So in postmenopausal woman, why there is a more requirement of calcium? Because in the postmenopausal age there is a lack of estrogen and progesterone hormones, and lack of estrogen hormone is responsible for osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is the disease of bone in which there is a reduction of bony mass. That means calcium is removed from the bones, and this occurs in the postmenopausal woman because of lack of estrogen. So in postmenopausal woman, calcium requirement is higher, that means 1.5 gram per day. So this is the dietary requirements for various age groups. Let us see the absorption of calcium. That means if we take food stuff which is rich in calcium, then after digesting these food stuff, calcium is absorbed from which part of our GI tract? So calcium is absorbed mostly from the duodenum. So duodenum is part from GI tract, and from this duodenum calcium is get absorbed after digestion of food. Then there are some factors which are stimulating factors for the absorption of calcium from GI tract into the duodenum, while some factors are promoting factors. That means some factors stimulate the absorption of calcium and some factors inhibits the calcium absorption in our GI tract. So let us see the different factors which promotes calcium absorption and which inhibits the calcium absorption. So some factors are promoting factors and some factors are inhibiting factors. So let us see these factors one by one. So inhibiting factors and promoting factors. So promoting factors are 3 in number, that means vitamin D, parathyroid hormone and low pH. So calcium absorption is get stimulated by vitamin D, also by PTH, that means parathyroid hormone, and low pH of GI tract. Then let us see the inhibiting factors which inhibits the calcium absorption. So there are 4 factors. First one is phytates and oxalates. That means food stuff which are rich in phytates and oxalates. Then second factor is high content of dietary phosphate which inhibits the calcium absorption. Then third factor is high pH. Fourth factor is high content of dietary fiber. So let us discuss these factors in detail. calcium absorption. So let us see first that factors which are promoting the calcium absorption. So factors promoting calcium absorption, first factor is vitamin D. So vitamin D induces the synthesis of calcium binding proteins in the intestinal epithelial cells. So vitamin D is necessary for synthesis of proteins which binds with the calcium, and these proteins are get synthesized in the intestinal epithelial cells with the help of vitamin D, and through these proteins calcium get absorbed in the duodenum. So vitamin D is responsible for absorption of calcium. That means indirectly vitamin D activates the absorption of calcium or stimulates the absorption of calcium from intestine. So indirectly it promotes the calcium absorption, so that vitamin D is promoting factor for the calcium absorption. So let us see second factor, that is hormone PTH, that means parathyroid hormone. So parathyroid hormone enhances calcium absorption through increased synthesis of calcitriol. So parathyroid hormone, that means PTH, is indirectly responsible for synthesis of vitamin D, so that PTH hormone indirectly the promoting factor for calcium absorption, because parathyroid hormone enhances the calcium through the increased synthesis of calcitriol, because parathyroid is one of the important factor for the synthesis of vitamin D. So PTH is indirectly the factor which promotes the calcium absorption in the duodenum. Let us see the third factor, that is acidity or the low pH. So low pH or acidic levels in the gastric or intestinal area, it is the most favorable for the calcium absorption. So acidity or the low pH of the GI tract, and this factor is the promoting factor for calcium absorption. So acidic environment for the absorption of calcium is very important, or it is a very favorable condition for the absorption of calcium from GI tract. So we have seen three factors which are promoting calcium absorption. First factor was vitamin D, then second is parathyroid hormone, then third factor is acidity or the low pH of GI tract. So these are the three factors which are responsible for promoting the calcium absorption from GI tract. Let us see the factors which are inhibiting the calcium absorption. So let us see inhibiting factors. First one is the phytates and oxalates form insoluble salts and interfere with the calcium absorption. So phytates and oxalates, so phytate rich food, that is sesame or soya beans or rice bran, so from these food stuff we get phytates, and oxalates we get from nuts such as peanuts, seeds, grains, legumes and spinach. So these are the food stuff from which we get oxalates. So food stuff which are rich in phytates and oxalates inhibits the calcium absorption, because these phytates forms insoluble salts, and so that calcium absorption get hampered because of the formation of these insoluble salts, and so that as these salts are insoluble they cannot be absorbed easily, so there is a interference with the calcium absorption. So phytates and oxalates are the factors which inhibits the calcium absorption because they forms insoluble salts. Then second factor which inhibits the calcium absorption is high content of dietary phosphate. So if we take phosphate in a more amount, then it results in the formation of insoluble calcium phosphate. If we take more quantity of phosphate, then the phosphate along with calcium forms insoluble calcium phosphate, and so that as this salt is insoluble, the this salt cannot be easily absorbed through the intestine. So calcium becomes insoluble along with this phosphate, and so that calcium absorption get inhibited. So phosphate is also one of the factor which inhibits the calcium absorption. So dietary ratio of calcium and phosphorus between 1:2 and 2:1 is the ideal for optimum calcium absorption by intestinal cells. That means we have to take calcium and phosphate from our diet in the ratio between 1:2 or 2:1. So these are the favorable ratios for the calcium absorption by the intestinal cells. So more quantity of phosphate through the diet inhibits the calcium absorption, because these phosphates in the large quantity forms insoluble calcium phosphate. That means calcium get insoluble due to the phosphate, and so that calcium absorption get inhibited. The next inhibiting factor is alkaline condition. As we have seen in the promoting factors, that is acid or the low pH is the favorable environment for calcium absorption. So alkaline condition or high pH is the unfavorable for calcium absorption. Let us see the last factor which inhibits the calcium absorption, that is high content of dietary fiber. So if we take diet which is rich in dietary fibers, then also calcium absorption get inhibited. So this is the last factor which inhibits the calcium absorption, and that is high content of dietary fiber. Now let us see biochemical functions of the calcium. That means why calcium is necessary for our body, or for which functions calcium is necessary in our body. So let us see biochemical functions. So first function is development of bones and teeth, then second is for muscle contraction, then third is blood coagulation, fourth is nerve transmission, fifth is membrane integrity and permeability, sixth is activation of enzymes, seventh is calcium as an intracellular messenger. So these are the 7 functions for which calcium is necessary in our body. So let us see one by one these functions. First function is the development of bones and teeth. So calcium along with the phosphate is required for the formation of bones and teeth. So calcium and phosphate are both are necessary for the growth and development of our bones and teeth. Then second function is muscle contraction. Calcium ion interacts with troponin C to trigger muscle contraction. So here troponin C is the protein which is present in, or which is resides in the muscles, especially the actin filaments of our muscle fiber. Actin filament, which is the thin filament in our muscles, and in these actin filaments this troponin C resides, and along with this troponin C calcium get binds for the contraction of muscles. So troponin C is the binding protein for calcium, and along with this binding there is a muscle contraction occurs. So calcium is necessary for contraction of our muscles. Then third is blood coagulation. As we know, all of know that factor 4 is the coagulating factor, and that factor 4 is the calcium. So factor 4 or calcium is important for the coagulation process. So several reactions in the cascade of blood clotting process are dependent on calcium ion, that means factor 4. So we have seen the cascade process of blood clotting, and in this blood clotting process. Factor 4, that means calcium, is necessary factor which is responsible for the coagulation of blood. The next function of calcium is nerve transmission. So calcium ions are also necessary for the transmission of nerve impulse. Not only calcium but also potassium, sodium are also important for the nerve transmission. So next function is membrane integrity and permeability. So calcium also affects the cell membrane integrity and permeability. So calcium influences membrane structure, and so that it also affects the transport of water and several ions across it. So this is the one of the important function, that is membrane integrity and permeability. So membrane permeability and integrity also depends upon the calcium ion. The next function is activation of enzyme. So calcium ion is needed for direct activation of enzymes such as pancreatic lipase. So for the activation of various digestive enzymes, calcium is needed. So in the absence of this calcium ion, pancreatic lipase is remain in the inactive form. So for the activation of this pancreatic lipase, calcium plays important role. Then next function is the calcium as a intracellular messenger. So certain hormones exert their action through calcium ions instead of cyclic AMP. So cyclic AMP and calcium ion, these are the second messengers, and this second messenger are important for the mechanism of hormones. So hormones are three types: protein hormones, steroid hormones, and third one is a thyroid nature or derivatives of amino acid, that means thyroid hormones. So all these hormones binds with some receptors, and these receptors are present in various locations in the cell, that means target cell. Some receptors are present on the membrane, some receptors are present in the cytoplasm, and some receptors are present in the nucleus. So out of these, protein hormones which are binds with the receptor which are present on the membrane, and after binding with these membrane receptors, protein hormones along with this second messenger plays their role into the target cell. So calcium acts as a second messenger for protein hormones. So before concluding today's lecture, let us have a short recap on today's topic, that is principal elements. The principal elements are also called as macrominerals, and we have seen that there are 7 principal elements, and these principal elements are the inorganic substances and which are required by our body greater than 100 mg per day. So principal elements are required in amount greater than 100 mg per day. There are 7 principal elements, and that 7 principal elements are calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, sodium, potassium, chloride, and sulfur. So out of these 7 macrominerals, we have seen in today's lecture, that is calcium. So let us discuss about calcium. Calcium, which is the most abundant inorganic substance present in our body, and total content of calcium in our body is 1 to 1.5 kg. And out of this 1 to 1.5 kg, 99% is the calcium which is present in the bones and teeth. Then we have seen sources of calcium. So richest source of calcium is milk and milk products also, while the good sources are beans, leafy vegetables, fish, cabbage, and egg yolk. So these are the sources of calcium, that means the food items from which we get calcium. Then dietary requirements, that means the amount which is required by the body. Then in infants, calcium is required in quantity, that is 300 to 500 mg per day, while in children's it is required 0.8 to 1.2 gram per day, while in adult men and women the daily requirement is 800 mg, but this daily requirement is increased in the women which are pregnant and lactating women, and also in the post menopausal women. So in pregnant women, lactating women and post menopausal women, the daily requirement is 1.5 gram per day. Then after that we have seen the absorption of calcium, that means from which part of our GI tract calcium get absorbed after the ingestion. So calcium is absorbed in the duodenum. Then we have seen some factors that are inhibiting factors and promoting factors for the absorption of calcium. So factors promoting the calcium absorption and factors inhibiting the calcium absorption. So here the factors which promotes calcium absorption are vitamin D, parathermone and low pH. So these are the three factors which promotes the calcium absorption from duodenum. Then inhibiting factors, that means the factors which inhibits the calcium absorption, these factors are phytates and oxalates, that means the food items which are rich in phytates and oxalate, such as phytate is present in the food items such as soya beans, then sesame, and oxalates mainly present in the nuts, legumes and grains, and spinach also. Then second factor which inhibits the calcium absorption is high content of dietary phosphate, while third factor is a high pH, that means alkaline condition in the GI tract, and fourth factor is the high content of dietary fibers, that means if we take diet which is rich in dietary fibers, then that diet inhibits the absorption of calcium from the duodenum. So these are the factors. Some factors are promoting factors and some factors are inhibiting factors. Then after that we have seen the functions of calcium in our body, that means biochemical functions. So let us see the biochemical functions of calcium. So there are 7 main functions. First one is that development and growth of bones and teeth. Then second is muscle contraction. Then third is blood coagulation, because calcium is one of the coagulating factor and which is responsible for coagulation of blood. Then next function is nerve transmission. Then next function is membrane integrity and permeability. Then next function is activation of enzymes. Then last one function is calcium act as a intracellular messenger for some hormones. So let us see the functions of calcium. First function is development of bones and teeth. So calcium is one of the important mineral which required for the development and growth of bones and teeth. So along with calcium, phosphate is also necessary for the development of bones and teeth. Then second function is muscle contraction. So troponin C, which is present in the actin filament of the muscles, and along with this troponin C, calcium binds, and after that muscle get contracted. So calcium indirectly helps in the contraction of muscles, especially striated muscle, that means skeletal and cardiac muscles. Then third function is blood coagulation. As we have seen in the blood chapter that factor 4 out of coagulating factors, that factor 4 is the calcium. So calcium is necessary for intrinsic as well as extrinsic processes in the coagulation. Then next function is the nerve transmission. For the transmission of nerve impulses, various ions are important such as calcium, sodium and potassium also. So calcium plays important role in the transmission of nerve impulses. Then fifth function is membrane integrity and permeability. So calcium influences the membrane structure and so that it alters the membrane permeability as well as its integrity. So indirectly it helps in the transport of water and several ions across it. Then next function is activation of enzymes. So certain digestive enzymes which are inactive after their secretion, then in contact with this calcium they get activated. So for example such as pancreatic lipase. So pancreatic lipase activated in the presence of calcium ions. So calcium is necessary for activation of enzymes. Then last one function is calcium as an intracellular messenger. So calcium plays important role in the hormonal actions through its second messenger role. So calcium plays as a role of a second messenger in relation to the protein hormones. So calcium indirectly helps in the action of hormones. So thanks for watching this video. If any queries you can comment